saying it because in America, the subtitle is Worst Enemy and the hope for its future. And in England, you erase the hope. And I don't know why. So and I'm starting with it because I don't know, in Israel history, there are great moments. And the question is a parameter from the emotional point of view. I think that the peace with Egypt was, for me, I did not mention, Declaration of Independence only because I was too young. I was 3 years old and I don't remember anything. But I do remember Sadat visit and the peace with Egypt. And for me, I don't know. It was the first time when I came to believe that there is a new Middle East, or at least we can achieve a different kind of Middle East.
Right.
And on the opposite side, I think that the assassination of our Prime Minister, Yitzhak Rabin, was the lowest moment. Not the wars, but yes, when I think of it, his assassination was our lowest moment.
Yeah. Yeah, what a contrast, those two things, the leader of Egypt and the leader of Israel, one being celebrated and one being murdered.
Right. Both of them, by the way, both of them were murdered.
Indeed. Indeed. How many years was it before Sadat was murdered? Three years after the agreement?
Sadat was murdered in 78 or 9.
Yeah.
And but in a way, it was the same reason.
Yeah, it was.
When we are speaking about radicalism, fundamentalism, and terror, we are not so different as we wish to be.
It's interesting. The similarity of those two things is a sad one to point out to you. But it leads me actually onto one of the other things that I was struck by, which is you set out in your book this idea that actually, partially due to the influence of Professor Gans, that there's two types of Zionism. There's two ways to think about what Israel is and what Zionism is. One is what you call the kind of deed to the land, the Bible being the deed to the land, and that tends to be the view of some, particularly on the right wing, but not exclusively. And yet the other view is that it's about self-determination. That kind of self-determination language you point out comes from the founders, from Woodrow Wilson, from the earlier 20th century. And I wonder why that isn't the natural, why that doesn't seem to be the language that people use when they think about Israel. What's the fear about talking about Zionism as Jewish national self-determination? Why don't we?
I'm not sure I have a good answer. I'm not a historian, and I spent several years in the academia, but I'm not a scholar. The way I understand, there is a question: what are we first? Jews, Israelis, human beings, whatever. It's for me, it depends on the moment that you ask the question. In many cases, I will tell you I am a human being, and only later I'm an Israeli, and only later I'm a Jew, etc., etc. But I think that most Israelis, when they try to define themselves, will tell you, especially today, we are Jews. Our General Chief of Staff, when in a major speech, when he gave to the Israeli people and of course Israeli soldiers, he said the IDF is how do you say, Tzva Ha'am is is the military organization of the people.
Yeah.
By the way, when we say people, we mean the Jewish people.
Right. The People's Army.
That defend the Jewish people and is fighting along the Jewish values.
Right.
And I wrote to him a letter telling him that he's totally wrong. IDF is the military organization of the state of Israel and not of the Jewish people. By the way, we have many soldiers who are not Jews.
Of course.
We have and his mission is not to defend the Jewish people, not in England and even not in Israel, but to defend the Israeli citizens. The 20% of them are not Jews, and we are not fighting. When we fight, we do not see the code of ethics of the IDF is not a Jewish code of ethics. We spoke earlier. What is our definition of Judaism in Israel?
Right.
It is not very clear. In my book, I'm sure that you remember the chapter about when I meet Rabbi Itzik Shapira.
Yeah.
His concept of Judaism are not my concept. I'm much closer to Rabbi Jonathan Sachs than to Itzik Shapira. Probably the audience doesn't know exactly what is the ideas of Itzik Shapira, but in his speeches, in his writings, he explains that it is okay to kill Palestinians and it is okay to kill Palestinians as civilians, and it is okay to kill even Palestinian babies who are still babies, because it is clear that when they will be grown up, they will be terrorists.
Am I right, Ami, in thinking that in Torah HaMelech, the book you're mentioning, which has had a huge influence, that Rabbi Shapira uses the same rationale, that of a Din Rodef, a pursuer, the same rationale that Yigal Amir used in justifying why he was killing Rabin.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So probably this is, it was a very long answer, by the way, to a very short question, but probably we have to look for our past in order to understand ourselves. You know, my parents, I don't think that they thought too much about it, but Zionism was a revolution. And a revolution meaning they changed the narrative of the past. They changed their vision of the future. And as a result, they changed the way they understand the present.
Right.
So they started by erasing 2,000 years of past. They did not mention the Mishnah, the Talmud, Rishonim, Achronim. They erased 2,000 years of Jewish wisdom. And they went back to the kingdom of David. They created new heroes. Forgotten. You know, Bar Kokhba and Samson are not mentioned in the Mishnah.
No.
The people who committed suicide in Masada, they did something which is totally against Jewish belief.
Yeah.
So they were erased, and our parents created new heroes. And of course, they created a new vision, a new future. Why it is important? Because in a way, what we are facing today is a kind of a counter-revolution. You know, we are going back to the Mishnah, to the Talmud, etc., etc. So, well, in the book, I'm trying to explain it, but we don't have enough time.
No, and no, there wouldn't be enough time even if we had all day. But exactly what you've said is quite telling. I've seen in the last 5, 10 years, even in a short period of time, lots of secular Israelis studying Talmud. There's now secular yeshivot. There's a re-evaluation of what it means to be a nation and what part of history is the right part of history, how the diaspora is meant to be understood. Do you think that's a good strategy for countering this idea that the diaspora is inherently about destruction? Is it trying to affirm that there's more than just anti-Semitism and violence in those 2,000 years? Trying to uphold those things? Well, why are young Israelis secular Israelis, gravitating towards learning Talmud in Tel Aviv?
Well, first of all, the question is that they are looking for roots.
Mm.
You cannot erase your roots. I have a very good Palestinian friend. Probably we shall mention him in a moment, Professor Saino Seiba. And we launched together an initiative trying to portray a different future. In 6 parameters, how peace can look like. And when I met him, by the way, it was in London, but when I met him, I think that the first question he asked me, Ami, tell me something about your past. And I said, okay, my parents, my father came as illegal immigrant, again, against the British mandate, by the way. Until his last day, he used to think that the British are the real enemy. I used to tell him, Pa, you are not quite updated, but anyhow. And my mother came as a child to study in Jerusalem. He said, no, your family tree. And I said, frankly speaking, I don't have any family tree, and I have no idea. I am a member of a generation without grandparents. All our grandparents stayed in Europe and were assassins there. And we don't have this kind of past. We have a great past, the kingdom of David, etc., etc. But we erased 2,000 years. We did not erase only the Mishnah and the Talmud. We erased our family tree. We couldn't care less, because instead of fighting and instead of doing something in order to create a state for the Jewish people, they were, I don't know, praying, studying, etc., etc.
Yeah, there was a lot of anxiety around that image.
Right. And in a way, we are trying to go back and to find our personal history. But his answer, I asked him, okay, tell me something about. He showed me a family tree that started in the 7th century in Jerusalem during the time of Muhammad. And in Jerusalem, in the Holy Church, Christians are fighting each other. So they need a Goy Shel Shabbat. Of course, it's a Muslim family to keep the key of the church.
Right, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the keys are kept by...
The keepers are Seiba family.
Right.
His family are the keepers. So it's sometimes, it is not enough to read a philosopher in order to understand that it is very, very difficult to say, this is only mine. This land is only mine. Although this is what we are studying at school. When you meet a person like Saino Seiba, you understand that, yes, it is ours, but it is not only ours.
Right. The depth of his history makes it impossible for you to disregard that. And it's interesting seeing the reaction that people, perhaps following your advice, are starting to think differently about what Israel's past means and starting to question some of those ideas that the founders had, that you just erase, everything from the Tanakh to the Palmach, as is the common saying. It strikes me that move is part of the move that we're seeing for other reasons as well, which you talk a lot about in your book, of the gradual disintegration of the two-state project. The idea that there can be 2 states for 2 peoples every year looks less and less likely, at least from our point of view here, I'd say. And you outline many of the moments when the 2-state process took a blow and when it could have been saved. It's actually quite painful to read your memoirs because you can feel your pain at being able or not being able to do something, knowing what was happening, right? You seem to have a prophetic knowledge of what was going to happen, and no one listened, like Cassandra. So I wonder, as we are now, do you think that we are moving towards a binational single state? Is there any way but that? And if that is the only way, what's it going to look like?
Look, prophecy was given to, I don't know, to fools, no?
Yeah,
So,
they were never listened to. Don't worry, no
okay,
prophet was ever
okay,
listened to.
but we have to try to predict. So I don't know. I believe that two-state solution is the only viable solution. We tend to forget that not Judaism nor Islam accepted the idea of separation between religion to nationalism, to nationalism. If we shall not majority in our state, if our border will be the Jordan, we are not majority today. If we are not majority, we do not have the right and we do not have the power to dictate the identity of the public space.
Right.
The calendar, the language, the stories that we tell our children, what happened in this region, during the last 5,000, 3,000 or 100 years. There are two totally conflicting narratives about what happened. For me, November 47, UN resolution is the defining moment, the creation of the state of Israel. For the Palestinian, it is a Nakba. It is a disaster. So in order to keep ourselves as a majority, the only way is to divide this piece of land. And I understand why it is so difficult. It is so difficult because in order to do it, it's not like the peace with Egypt or with Jordan. We saw them as states. We gave back land, but it is not the places in which the Jewish people was created. It's when we mention Egypt in the Bible, it is a place of foreigners. It is not ours. Hebron, Beit El, Jericho is something totally different. So in order to create peace with the Palestinians, we have to touch the most sensitive nerves of our existence, of our identity, of our past, of our future. We have to discuss the land of Israel, the concept of pioneers. For me, the settlers were pioneers.
Right.
My parents were settlers, and after the 67 war, my friend from the kibbutz, I stayed in the Navy, and they went to create settlements. This was a way to shape the future borders of Israel. So this is why people understand. Okay, it is so clear. If you want to keep your identity as a Jewish democracy, the only way to do it is in a reality of two states. People outside do not understand how difficult it is. And yes, for us Israelis, it is very difficult, especially when fear controls our life.
And that fear, it's something that you see on both sides, as you talk about quite a bit, the fear of the other, of what they're going to do, of whether you can trust them. And it seems like, going back a little bit to the question of self-determination, one thing we talk about a lot, at least here in the UK, in the discussions around anti-Semitism, and is anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism, etc., is it a double standard that we hold for Israel? Do we hold the same standard for Israel as other countries? And a lot of it comes down to self-determination. If you believe the Palestinians have the right to a state because they're a nation and a culture and a homeland, then you have to believe the same about Israel. And that's a very sound logic and one that I use often in talking to people. But maybe if we went to Israelis and used the same logic in reverse, said if you believe that you have a right to self-determination, then you must believe that this other nation does too, it would really frighten people. I wonder if that's why the Bible as the deed to the land mode has taken so much more precedence in people's mind, because it's quite scary to recognize that self-determination isn't unique.
Well, I think the Bible play a major role, but not the major role. If you ask me, the major role is a fear and our expectation to achieve security.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you cannot understand. For example, during the 90s, the support for two states, we reached more than 80% of support of Israelis in the concept of two states. And the Bible was there, and our history was there, but we believed it was after the first Intifada, and we came to believe that the only way for us to achieve security is by negotiation. And we were ready to give land.
Yeah.
Most Israelis were ready to give even the Arab neighborhoods in Jerusalem, which means to divide Jerusalem.
Right.
The tragedy is that we believe that we gave everything, and their response was Intifada and terror. And we are right. This is exactly what happened. But on the other hand, we do not see their narrative. Their narrative, we wanted security. All what they wanted was to see the end of occupation. And they even accepted the idea that the occupation is only the 67, not 48. And they even accepted the idea of swap, of exchange of territories along the lines of 67. But all what they saw during Oslo was more settlements, more roadblocks, more military units, etc., and more humiliation. So both people feel betrayed.
Yeah.
And we do not see their narrative, they do not see our narrative. And that's it. This is the real answer.
What bridges that gap? I mean, I remember in my time in Israel, one thing that a lot of friends of mine were doing was going on encounter, right? An experience, for those who don't know, in which often Israeli families or individuals are sent to live in the West Bank for a weekend with Palestinian family, and vice versa. Palestinian family sent to live with Israeli family. Sounds like a reality show, but it actually does a lot of good in some way, because then that Israeli that comes home isn't thinking about a cardboard cutout Palestinian, but a real person who they spent time with, who they ate with. I mean, does that work, actually just getting people to know each other? You talk a lot about your relationship with Professor Nusabeh and about the work that you did together. How much of a factor is just knowing people and having that relationship and building that trust?
It's a great idea, but it will take, I don't know, 400 years in order for all the Israelis to know all the Palestinians. And this is exactly what happened, because although between 70 to 80% on both sides were ready to accept the idea of giving up, we on Greater Israel and they on Greater Palestine, minorities, our minority, we assassinated our prime minister. We are uprooting olive trees, and we are facing our settlers, not all of them, by the way, but some of them are creating humiliation in the West Bank.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, there between 15 to 20% of Palestinians, they believe in terror. They believe that the only way to achieve freedom, to see the end of occupation, is not by negotiations, and not by diplomacy. And these two minorities shaped the history of the Middle East during the last 30 years.
Right. You talk a lot about the silent majority, the people who actually don't feel that way, but don't have a voice because those small fringes make so much more of an impact. And you can feel that when you talk about Baruch Goldstein and the massacre in Hebron and vice versa, the Intifada and how it sank the peace process. I guess, what have you seen that works as a way to counter that? How do you prevent those fringe elements from seizing up and taking over the story?
It's a combination. I'm a great believer in the civil society. I'm a great believer in the civil society, especially today, because the technology that we have today, the idea that we can bring. Well, my dog is unbelievable. Just a moment.
I feel like I know this dog because he talks a lot about him in the book, by the way, if anyone hasn't read the book. The dogs are a character.
Sorry,
okay.
we are living in the village, and every time when a strange animal is passing by, so the dog is barking.
Of course.
So the technology, the idea that you can bring 1 million people to a square, whether it is Tahrir Square in Cairo or whether it is Rabin Square in Tel Aviv.
Right.
With, I don't know, in the social network. You don't have to pay a lot of money, etc., etc. It's a huge power.
Yeah.
And it should be a combination. I saw it happening. We left Lebanon because we forced our politicians. Ehud Barak did not believe when he was a general chief of staff. He did not believe in leaving Lebanon. We built the security fence in a way, whether it is good or bad, I'm not arguing, but we created a reality of two states by building this security fence. It was imposed on Ariel Sharon. This was the last thing that he wanted to do. And we left Gaza as a result of violence and civil society movements.
It's interesting, you probably wouldn't say it yourself, but you note in the book that part of the reason that Ariel Sharon agreed or decided to do the Gaza disengagement was actually your influence and that of other prominent members of the military apparatus who publicly made a statement in the press saying that you thought it was time to do something, and the worry that Ariel Sharon had that he would lose the support of those people. And that led ultimately to the Gatekeepers Project, right? Which, so for those who haven't seen it, remarkable documentary featuring Ami and 5 other former Shin Bet heads all saying more or less the same thing, which is what you'll read in his book, which is that this is a far overdue need. Why hasn't that succeeded with this government, with Bibi?
Well, it will not succeed. It is not. It's not a question of the government, by the way. Well, I'm not a supporter of Bibi Netanyahu, but it is not because of Bibi Netanyahu. You have to understand. I was the director of the Israeli Shin Bet when Netanyahu was the prime minister first in his first term, and even 3 or 4 years, 5 years ago, he gave a very, very important speech. No, it was 6 years ago, probably, telling Israelis in Bar-Ilan University that our future will have to be a 2 states reality. Because it was clear to him that this is it was dictated in a way by the international community during the time of Obama. And it was clear to him that it will be acceptable by Israelis. And in addition, and this is very, very important, people all the people, not only Israelis, are afraid of change. And the life in Israel is great. If you look, our economy, our education system, our health system, our science, our academia, if you look around us, it's a great place to live. So why should we pay this price? And people do not understand the price that we are paying every day by losing, because it's a gradual process. When we lose our identity as a Jewish democracy, my friend in the university, he wrote a great article during the 90s. I think I mentioned it in the book, Incremental Tyranny. When we face terror, our legal system, every time in time of war, we give up on rights and we prefer security. When security, in time of war, we are giving up on rights. And if terror is the definition of a war, so day by day, we are giving more and more rights. Now, it is not because of the prime minister. This is a demand of the people. Because the people are demanding and they choose their leaders accordingly.
They've chosen security over rights many times.
Especially when it is not their rights, it is the rights of minorities.
Of course.
And the others. You saw it during the Second World War, what Americans did to Japanese. Etc., etc. We do not understand that terror, there is no time limit. We don't know when it started and we don't know when it will end. As the 21st century, we shall have to live with terror. In Europe and in the Middle East. All what we have to do is to reduce the level of violence so we can create our education system, our health system, our better life. But it is like crime. It is not a real war.
No, it's not. And the way in which it's used in the political arena, as you point out many times, is to inspire fear and to ensure that those in power remain in power. And it's impossible, as we're talking this evening, not to think about what's going on in Israel right now, which is coalition negotiations for the 4th successive elections in 2 years. Coalition negotiations that look like once again they're going nowhere. And it seems like there's a just absolute stalemate in Israeli political life because no one can get over that barrier. No one is able to say security isn't the first concern, because then they're immediately disregarded. So I wonder, you mentioned before about prophets, and you mentioned in your book about being like Nostradamus, but how do Israelis get out of this stalemate? Are we going to see 5th elections? Do we have to change the party realignment? What's going to move to allow people to get past this idea of fear motivating their behavior?
Well, it's again, the way I understand it, it's a combination of first of all the understanding of the reality and the future, what we are paying every day, and we have to understand this gradual process in the long run. Second, and this is what I'm saying now is sad because I understand it, because I saw a different angle of the Israeli reality. I saw the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, and I saw the Palestinian terror, and most Israelis did not see the Israeli reality in the eyes of the director of the Israeli Shin Bet. Only few. But I can tell you that we Israelis understand when we suffer. During the Second Intifada, it was very, very easy to get signatures for our initiative. Not because our great leadership or charisma, and not because our blue eyes, because people were afraid and they were ready to sign on every piece of paper if they believed that it will bring them something better. And by the way, we saw it 5 years ago. We have a minor scale of violence in Jerusalem area, not led by Hamas and not led by some just youngsters who came to believe that they have nothing to lose and all what they want is to kill an Israeli.
Right. Car rammings and things mostly.
Right,
Yeah.
right. It was about 12 months. During these 12 months, in 3 polls, majority of Jews in Israel, we did not ask Israeli Arabs because it was clear that they will support 2 states, but majority of Jews between 67 to almost 70% of Israelis were ready to give up, to give back all the Arab neighborhoods of Jerusalem just in order to feel security.
Yeah.
So
you're suggesting maybe we turn that around and use people's desire for security as a way to get security.
Right. I hate to portray apocalyptic scenarios.
Right.
But I'm sad to say that it works. Of course, the scenario itself is not enough, but I'm afraid that we shall face violence. We shall face violence. By the way, today, we shall face violence. I don't know what will happen on the day after Abu Mazen. I have no idea if Palestinians will go to vote, whether Hamas will win.
Yeah.
I have no idea. I can tell you that I know the Palestinians as much as I know Palestinians. If when they go to vote, they will believe that by using diplomacy, they can achieve the end of occupation and the creation of a 2 states, Palestinian state alongside Israel, they will vote for a person who promised them this kind of diplomacy.
Yeah.
But if they will believe that the only way to get rid of occupation is by violence, they will vote for a leader who promised them violence. Whether his name will Jibril Rajoub or whether he was a leader of Hamas, it is not very important.
Yeah. It's interesting. We've had a question from, which got some feedback. We've had a question from someone in the audience about something which is about a different Abbas, Mansour Abbas and Ra'am. I'm sure I wasn't the only one, and clearly I wasn't, who was captivated by the fact that you had only 2 weeks ago, I think, half the country of Israel glued to the TV screen listening to an Arab Israeli politician who's going to be a kingmaker. What do you make of that? Does that signal a change?
I think it's a very, very important moment, by the way. This is the beginning of the legitimacy to see an Israeli-Palestinian party as part of the coalition. This is a beginning. We have a long way to go, but this is a beginning. It is very, very important because the one who gave this type of legitimacy is the right, is not the left.
Yeah.
And by the way, you have to understand that Mansour Abbas is the Muslim Brotherhood.
Yeah.
Is a fundamentalist Muslim religious party. Is not a secular party who are fighting for equal rights between Palestinians and Jews in Israel.
Yeah.
I believe that it is a major, a very, very important moment. By the way, a friend of mine published an article, I believe, he said, look, for 20, 30 years, we are debating whether the Israeli Arabs or Israeli Palestinians who are living in Jerusalem will vote for the Jerusalem municipality, for the mayor of Jerusalem. They live in Jerusalem. And by the way, most Israeli governments told them that they are not allowed to vote for a Palestinian president.
Right.
So if in 2 years, by the way, we have elections in Jerusalem, if they will decide to vote in 2 years, it is a very realistic scenario that the mayor of Jerusalem will be an Arab. So I think, by the way, why I'm so optimistic, because there is something, you know, the worst scenario for most Israelis is one state. Most Israelis understand that in the reality of one state, we shall have to give rights to the Palestinians. And once we do it, we are losing our identity as a Jewish state, as I said before. So once Israelis will understand it, they will find themselves much closer to adopt the version of two states.
Yeah.
So this is why this moment, the speech of Mansour Abbas is, in retrospect, I believe that it will be a very, very important moment.
We've got a related question, and to some degree, about the two-state solution and its future. Chaim, who's in actually Maralot Tarshisha on your side of the world, has asked about the right of return and whether you think that the right of return is always going to prevent a two-state solution, to offer that option to 5.6 million Palestinian refugees supported by UNRWA. Is that going to prevent there ever being a two-state solution? In your People's Voice guidelines, how did you deal with the question of right of return?
Yeah, it's this is something, you know, most Israelis. By the way, in every meeting, I'm asked exactly this question, and I was asked this question in hundreds of meetings in Israel in Hebrew. Israel, we know nothing about Palestinians. You know, when Arafat signed on first on the Palestinian Declaration of Independence in '88, accepting two states, and then when he signed on Oslo, many of his supporters in the PLO, in Fatah, turned against him. And his deputy, by the way, told him, you are betraying the whole Palestinian ethos, because it is clear that if we divide this piece of land, you are giving up the ethos of 48. It was not mentioned, but for them, this is the way they understood Oslo. And he said, okay, we have to accept it. This is what we can achieve in our generation. And in 2002, a friend of mine, another Palestinian friend of mine, Halil Shkaki, I mentioned in the book. By the way, he is the brother of Fatih Shkaki, who is the founder of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And he died somewhere in Malta. So I'm saying it, he's the most important pollster in Palestine. He made a poll in, by the way, in the Palestinian diaspora, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Jordan, and of course among, I think in probably even some places in South America. About 15,000 people. And they were asked if they will have the ability, would they vote for going back to the state of Israel or to the state of Palestine, or to achieve citizenship in the places where they live, or to immigrate to some other countries. I don't know, at the time we spoke about Canada or whatever. Less than 20% voted for going back to Israel. Why I'm saying it? Because in a way, when he published his report, the people in the street destroyed his offices, because this was the beginning of the end of the Palestinian right of return ethos. I'm saying it because we Israelis, we do not see it. By the way, today we know, and this is the way I see the future. When Abu Mazen negotiated with Ehud Olmert, there was a group of people on both sides that negotiated the future of the Jewish settlers that will stay in Palestine if they will choose to stay in Palestine and not to come back to the state of Israel. And on the other hand, the number of Palestinians who will be accepted into Israel. If you ask me, we shall have to negotiate. And if you ask me, my answer is exactly the number of settlers who will prefer to stay in Palestine. This will be the number of refugees that I will be ready to accept into Israel.
That you included a 1-to-1 ratio in your document. That's what you meant.
Right. And we shall discuss their status, whether they will be, I don't know, Palestinian citizens and those who will come to Israel, Israeli Palestinian or whatever.
Interesting.
It should be negotiated. By the way, and it was understood by Abu Mazen when he negotiated with Ehud Olmert. Yeah,
it was personally, I had the opportunity to visit with APAC at one point, who I'm sure you have interesting thoughts on. And one of the things that they allowed us to do is to meet with Saeb Erekat, who I was very pleased to meet and interested to meet. And one of the things I wanted to ask him was, why didn't the 2008 agreement between Olmert and Abu Mazen work, and how close was it? And his implication was that it was very, very close, that it could have been done, but that it's only because Olmert was tried for corruption that it wasn't done, which is just heartbreaking if that's the case, that we were that close.
Yes. I can tell you from my knowledge, and it was published, so it's not a secret, they negotiated on two tracks. On one track, Tzipi Livni with Abu Ala. On the other track, Olmert with Abu Mazen. And of course, Olmert with Abu Mazen was much closer. Tzipi Livni was much tougher. When it was clear that she will replace him, she told Abu Ala, you should not believe to any of the promises of Ehud Olmert, because when I will replace him, I will start from the place that I negotiated with you, Abu Ala.
I see.
So tell Abu Mazen, don't sign anything. And we just, most Israelis doesn't know it.
Yeah. I had no idea until talking to Erekat that it was so close. And it's seems like if people did know that, it might make them a little bit more it changes the story, doesn't it? If we were that close, then we can be that close again.
Yeah.
One question we've had in the chat, and I apologize, we have more than we have time to ask, but one that I think is very relevant to what you talk about in your book, and actually the very last page you talk about it. Peter Lurie is asked about apartheid. The word apartheid gets thrown around a lot in the West, in diaspora communities. Is it the right word now? If not, will it be soon? And what do you think about the people who use the word apartheid to describe the situation in the occupied territories?
Well, what do I think about the people who believe that in the occupied territory it is apartheid? I believe that in the occupied territory it is apartheid. So what do I think about myself? I'm writing a book about it. I believe that it's a horrible term and it's a horrible word, but we have to face reality. We have two different legal systems: a legal system for Palestinians and a legal system for Jews who are living in settlements. If you are a Jew in Kiryat Arba, which is Hebron, you will get much more water, drinking water, than if you are an Arab, a Muslim. There are many roads that are open only to Jews and not to Palestinians. So this is apartheid. And if there is another word, I don't care, but this is the reality that goes against all our moral values. So, and my fear is, we are not doing it because we believe in apartheid or racism. No. We convinced ourselves, and probably we are right, that this is the only way to keep these territories. And I know it because I know exactly what I, as a director of the Shin Bet, and we are telling it in Hebrew and it was translated to English in gatekeepers. In order to maintain security, we are not torturing, but we are creating a horrible reality to hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. We humiliate them, and we do not give them what they deserve. Their rights.
It's interesting. It's a nuance to talk about what's going on in the occupied territories, which I think correctly you say resembles that which we might call apartheid, versus the rest of Israel, including Israeli Arabs who live in Israel who don't experience that. There may be discrimination, but it's nothing like that. And that's part of that's so difficult, I think, for outsiders, is the nuance between those different regions, all of which are in a very small space. We have limited time remaining, and actually I'm very aware from reading your book that I don't want to make the mistake that the director of Gatekeepers made, that you pointed out to him, which is that he left out the hopeful bits. Right, the film was intended, at least by you, to include both serious and relevant and stirring testimony, but also a hope for the future. And you started our evening today by talking about how the UK edition of the book edited the title. It was meant to be How Israel Became Its Own Worst Enemy and Hope for the Future. And alas, that's disappeared. So you mentioned in the book a couple times about Yehuda Amichai's phrase about the barbed wire of hope. And I wonder if you can, as we close this evening, and I realize there's questions we haven't been able to answer, and I'm sorry that's the case, but I want us to end on a note from your point of view, with all your experience, with everything you've seen. Why should we be hopeful? What can we cling to? And what can help us to move into the future as people who support the state of Israel and want it to be its best self?
Well, it's my understanding of Zionism is based on two pillars. On optimism and on the power of will. This is what Churchill told us many years ago. If we will it, I'm saying it because this is why I am so optimistic. I'm optimistic not because I can tell you that tomorrow something great will happen. I have no idea. But if I learn something, I learn to believe, not to know, I learn to believe that I can maybe not shape, but I can influence on my future, on my personal future, and on my future as people. We, and when I say we, so why I'm speaking to you, in a way, this is part of the conspiracy. I'm trying to recruit you. I believe, I have no idea, but I believe that you understand and probably even believe in the concept of Zionism. Meaning that you love Israel. No, you don't love all what we do, but you love the concept of a Jewish democracy in the etc., with the values of our prophets, exactly as it is written in our Declaration of Independence. Now, Zionism was not invented in Israel. It was invented in Europe by people who believed that the creation of a Jewish state is the pillar to this concept, but it was not invented in Israel. And the idea was to create a safe haven for not all the Jews should come to Israel, but it is very, very important for Jews, whoever they live, to believe and to know that there is a place in which people are speaking Hebrew, and the calendar is a Jewish calendar, and they tell the stories of the people of Israel. This is what children are learning in schools, and the way we celebrate, etc. But my conclusion is, we Israelis, we do not have the right to destroy this concept, to bring this concept to its end. And I'm telling you, this is what we do. We in Israel, we are bringing Zionism to its end. If Zionism is a Jewish democracy in the way our parents described in our Declaration of Independence, I don't know if it will take 10 years, 20 years, or 30 years. We are bringing it to its end. Today, in Israeli politics, it is more than legitimate to speak about annexation. And it is obvious to every leader who speaks about annexation that he will not give equal rights to the Palestinian people who are living in this territory that he will annex. So this is the end of Zionism. No. It was not created in Israel, and we do not have the right to bring it to its end. Now, I'm speaking to you because it is for you to stand up and to tell us that we Israelis do not have the right to bring Zionism to its end. Zionism belongs not only to Israelis. It's a very, very unique concept. The state of Israel belongs to its citizens, but to every Jew who decides that it is his, whether he wants to donate or to come with his child to celebrate bar mitzvah or to make aliyah. It depends. He is a Zionist only if he believes that Israel has the right to survive as a Jewish democracy. He does not have to make aliyah. This is the concept. You asked me what is needed in order to change the course of our political community. Voice from the Jewish communities abroad. Yes, our voice as people who oppose the Israeli government today, at least in my case, yes, it is our responsibility, but we shall not be able to do it alone.
Thank you. It's the responsibility is a theme throughout your life, and it's an admirable one. Your honesty in this book and the integrity that your actions show is tremendous. And I don't think that there's too many people who can talk about the things you talk about, revisit all the people that made up your life and your history, and be so open and frank with them and with the audience and with the people reading this book. And it's really exceptional for us to be able to hear you and to learn from you, and hopefully advice that we'll take. I think there's an agency in Jewish communities outside the land of Israel that we haven't quite claimed, and it's a good inspiration to hear that. Really want to thank you for being with us. I'm going to hand it back to Kaylee to close us out this evening, but just can't say what a privilege it is to have you with us in St. Albans of all places. So thank you.
Yeah, just also, I think on behalf of everyone here, I want to thank you, Ami, and you, Adam, for that. It was fantastic. And I'm sure we could all sit here for hours on end and hear more and more. And maybe we'll get the opportunity to do that at another date. And if you are ever in England, please do come and visit us in sunny St. Albans. We'd love to have you at SAMS. So yeah, just a big thank you. And everyone, thank you for coming as well, and stay safe. And hopefully we'll see you all really soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ami. Please check out the book, guys. It's really,
of course, yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.